We're here with Burlington MPP, Liberal MPP Eleanor McMahon, originally a Windsor native, here with the Government Committee on Sexual Assault and Harassment.
Yeah.
Eleanor, just generally talk about the purpose of this committee's work.
So the Premier announced an action plan on International Women's Day that included several items, and I'll just give you a hint of a couple of those. There's about 6 of them. They include possible changes to the occupational health and safety legislation that governs our province. So safe and healthy workplaces, changes to campuses and how they are governed, and policies and harassment policies on campuses across the province. So legislative remedies are likely going to come out of this process. It's akin to the select committee, and select committees are unique because they are comprised of all members of the legislature, and they tend to have a nonpartisan focus. Let's face it, we all come to the table with different approaches to policy making, but in this context it's generally reserved for a really meeting of the minds. So there's broad consensus, and that's what drives the work of these select committees. There was one on mental health and addictions a few years ago, chaired by Kevin Flynn, who's now the Minister of Labour, and that has shaped policies and announcements and funding and legislation since. So I think we can look for some similar outcomes here. That's generally the way these processes work. But this committee in particular, like others, is focused on traveling the province and talking to people who've either, we've had all kinds of presentations here in Windsor. We've had academics. We just had a shelter from London, for example. Unifor was here talking about unionized workplaces and some recommendations to what will be Kevin Flynn's piece of this larger conversation. So a broad spectrum of analysis, data, experiences, really helpful. A really unique approach at the University of Windsor, and also one involving the law faculty and some social work. Shelley Gilbert presented on that this morning. Really interesting approaches to mitigation, to helping survivors deal through the various pieces of the process.
How far along is the committee in its work?
Well, this is our second week of travel, but we've been really underway since, I think it's February, since we started our work in earnest. We're meeting every week in Toronto, and our committee meetings are full and oversubscribed. So there's a tremendous amount of interest in the work of the committee, which I think points to the continuing interest in this, the continuing desire to ensure that we begin to look at workplaces that are free of sexual violence and harassment, and campuses, and our next generation. I mean, I'm of a certain age. When I was in Ottawa in a previous life 20 years ago, we passed the rape shield legislation, and I was at the Canadian Advisory Council on the status of women at the time. And when we worked on the national consultations, Kim Campbell was the Justice Minister. Remember Kim Campbell, our brief Prime Minister? We worked with Minister Campbell on changes to the rape shield law, which made it easier for women to appear in court and not have their sexual history or what they were wearing or their behavior taken into account. And I remember at the time we all thought, this has been a tremendous step forward. Wow, we've done it, we're there. And I guess all these years later, it's somewhat disheartening to realize that we still have a culture where victims are afraid to come forward, where there's still harassment in the workplace. And so I think there's a real meeting of the minds now to deal with this once and for all, and begin to unpack some of the societal frameworks that we need to put in place to really deal with it.